Ethan Wright sat on his couch staring at the disaster that had once been his pristine apartment. Takeout containers littered the coffee table, some still holding the remains of half-eaten meals. Dirty clothes were draped over the back of chairs, and a faint, unidentifiable smell lingered in the air. His desk, the heart of his home office, was a catastrophe of coffee-stained papers, tangled charging cables, and snack wrappers. He let out a long sigh and ran a hand through his messy brown hair. He hadn't meant to let things get this bad, but the past few weeks had been brutal. As a lead software developer, he had been buried in a high-priority project, pulling all-nighters and surviving on energy drinks. Cleaning had been the last thing on his mind. Now that the project was finally done, he had a moment to breathe, and to realize he was living in a war zone. He could tackle it himself, but after working so hard, the last thing he wanted to do was spend his free time scrubbing floors. That's when he remembered Intergalactic Domestic Solutions, IDS, a futuristic cleaning service that catered to humans and off-worlders alike. IDS was known for employing some of the most efficient workers from across the galaxy. Ethan had used them a few times before, and every experience had been top-notch. And the best part? He knew exactly who to request. He opened the IDS app on his tablet and scrolled through the available cleaners. His heart skipped slightly when he found the familiar name, Zyra. Zyra was a Zilari, a humanoid alien species known for their sleek, elegant forms, enhanced dexterity, and impeccable work ethic. He had hired her twice before, and both times, she had left his apartment spotless with an almost supernatural efficiency. She was professional, polite, and incredibly skilled. She was also stunning. Ethan would never admit it out loud, but he'd always been a little entranced by Zyra. She stood taller than him with smooth lavender skin that shimmered faintly under light. She had forearms, an evolutionary advantage that made her a perfect cleaner, and her large golden eyes held an otherworldly intelligence. Her long, dark tendrils, resembling both hair and delicate sensory appendages, framed her face and moved slightly when she was deep in concentration. She was always composed, always efficient. Ethan had never seen her flustered, never seen her break from her professional demeanor. But there was something about her presence that made his stomach twist in ways he tried to ignore. Shaking off his thoughts, he selected her profile and hit Request Cleaning Session. A confirmation popped up. Cleaner Zyra has accepted your request. Estimated arrival, 30 minutes. Ethan exhaled and set his tablet down. He had just enough time to shower and make himself look presentable, not because he wanted to impress her. Of course, just common courtesy. 30 minutes later, the soft chime of his doorbell echoed through the apartment. Ethan adjusted his t-shirt, took a quick breath, and opened the door. Zyra stood there in her sleek IDS uniform, an elegant yet functional dark bodysuit with silver accents. She carried a compact cleaning kit, a multi-purpose device that could scan, sanitize, and reorganize surfaces with advanced alien technology. "Greetings, Ethan Wright," she said, her voice smooth and slightly accented. "I have arrived to fulfill your cleaning request." Ethan smiled. "Hey, Zyra. Good to see you again." Her golden eyes studied him for a moment before she inclined her head. "It is good to see you as well." She stepped inside, her movements as graceful as always. As she surveyed the mess, her tendrils twitched slightly, a sign Ethan had come to learn that she was assessing the workload. "You have allowed considerable disorder to accumulate," she noted. There was no judgment. In her tone, merely observation. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I got busy with work, didn't really have time to keep up with cleaning." Zyra gave a slight nod. "That is understandable. I will restore order efficiently." She set down her kit and immediately got to work. Ethan watched as she moved with the precision of a machine, yet with the fluidity of something almost ethereal. Her forearms worked in perfect synchronization, one hand wiping down counters, another sorting clutter, a third activating the IDS cleaning device. It was mesmerizing. Normally, Ethan would retreat to his desk and let her work in peace. But today, Something felt different. He wasn't sure why, but there was a slight tension in the air. Zyra's usual flawless composure seemed just the tiniest bit off. She was still efficient, still methodical, but there was something distracted about her movements. At one point, she reached for a high shelf, standing on her toes. Her back arched slightly as she stretched, her uniform clinging to her sleek form. Ethan quickly averted his eyes, feeling a bit guilty for noticing. Then it happened. As she turned, her golden eyes locked onto his, and for just a second, less than a second, there was something in her gaze that he didn't recognize. A faint glow pulsed in her irises, and an unfamiliar scent filled the air. It was subtle at first, but as the minutes passed, the fragrance grew stronger. Sweet, floral, almost intoxicating. Ethan frowned. "Hey, Zyra. Is that a new air freshener or something?" She hesitated, her hands pausing mid-task. A moment later, she resumed, but he caught the slight stiffness in her posture. "No," she said smoothly. "It is nothing." But Ethan wasn't so sure. Something about the way she moved, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she picked up objects. It was not nothing. And that scent. It was making his head feel light, like he had just stepped into a garden of alien, flowers designed to scramble human senses. For the first time since he'd met her, Zyra seemed unsettled. Ethan decided to let it go for now, but a small knot of curiosity formed in his chest. Something was definitely off with Zyra today, and he had a feeling he was about to find out exactly what it was. Ethan tried to focus on anything but Zyra. He really did. He busied himself at his desk, scrolling through unread emails, pretending to be deeply absorbed in work. But it was impossible to ignore her presence as she moved through his apartment. Normally, she was a picture of calm efficiency, cleaning with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. But today, something was wrong. Zyra was distracted. She still cleaned, still performed each task with the precision he'd come to expect, but there was a noticeable delay in her movements. Her hands, usually so steady, hesitated before picking up an object. Occasionally, she would stop mid-task, pressing her lips together as if forcing herself to focus. And that scent, it had grown stronger. The sweet floral fragrance was no longer subtle. It wrapped around him like a soft haze, making his head feel light and his thoughts sluggish. Ethan wasn't a scientist, but he had enough experience with alien cultures to know that many species emitted pheromones. Was that what was happening? Was Zyra exuding some kind of Zalari scent that was affecting his brain? It was making him too aware of her. The smooth lavender skin of her arms, the way her four hands moved in perfect coordination, the slight sheen of perspiration forming along the base of her tendrils as she concentrated. Ethan shook his head sharply. Focus, man. This is a cleaning job, not a sci-fi romance novel. Still, he couldn't ignore the small signs. The way Zyra's breathing had grown shallower. The way she lingered just a bit too long when she passed by him. The way her golden eyes, normally so professional and composed, flickered with something unreadable every time they met his. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. Zyra. She froze, her hands clutching a microfiber cloth a little too tightly. Yes? He hesitated. He didn't want to pry into something personal, but he was genuinely concerned. You seem off today, he said carefully. You're not acting like yourself. And, he cleared his throat. What is that smell? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then slowly she straightened. Her tendrils, which usually hung loosely around. Her shoulders twitched slightly, a nervous gesture, Ethan realized. It is nothing, she said, her voice a little too firm. I am merely distracted. Ethan raised an eyebrow. By what? She exhaled, her golden eyes darting away. It is Varys? He repeated, testing the unfamiliar word. Zyra's hands curled at her sides. Mating cycle. Ethan's brain stalled. For a few seconds, he was sure he had misheard her. Wait. What? She took a breath, as if bracing herself. Zalari, experience Varus approximately once every 2 cycles of our homeworld's moon, she explained, her voice carefully neutral. During this time, our bodies release pheromones. It is a biological imperative meant to attract suitable mates. Normally, we do not work while in Varus as it can lead to complications. Ethan swallowed. So, you're in mating cycle right now? She nodded stiffly. His mind raced. That explained the scent, the slight shakiness, the strange way she had been acting. Then a realization struck him. But you chose to come here today. A flicker of something crossed her face. Guilt? Embarrassment? Yes, she admitted. I could have rescheduled, but I saw the request was from you, and I did not wish to refuse. Ethan's stomach did a little flip. That meant something, right? She could have taken the day off, could have let another IDS worker handle it, but instead, she had knowingly accepted the job, while in mating cycle, while emitting pheromones, and she had known it would affect him. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. Not fear, but something more electric, something that made his pulse beat a little faster. Zira shifted uncomfortably, her lower arms wrapping around her upper ones, in a gesture that almost looked vulnerable. I miscalculated, she murmured. I thought I could control it, but it is difficult. Ethan exhaled. Zira, if you need to go, I get it. You don't have to push yourself for a cleaning job. Her eyes flickered to his, and there was something almost pained in her expression. I do not wish to leave. Silence stretched between them. The floral scent was thick now, clouding the space between them. The golden glow in Zira's irises pulsed faintly, as if responding to some internal rhythm he couldn't understand. She took a step closer. Ethan's breath hitched. I can endure it, she said softly. If you wish me to continue my work, I will do so. Ethan hesitated. Logically, the best choice was to send her home. She was struggling. He didn't want to make things harder for her. But damn, it was getting difficult to think straight. Are you sure? He asked. Zira studied, him as if weighing the same dilemma. I am not certain, she admitted. That was the most honest answer she could have given. Another long silence. Finally, Zira exhaled, breaking the tension. I will complete my duties, she said, though there was something in her voice, something strained. I will manage. Ethan wasn't convinced, but he nodded. If she wanted to stay, he wouldn't force her to leave. But something told him this was far from over. And as Zira turned back to her work, her movements too controlled, her body, language too rigid, Ethan had the sinking feeling that this situation was about to escalate in ways he wasn't prepared for. Ethan told himself to focus, to sit at his desk, keep his hands busy, and pretend that nothing was out of the ordinary. But the problem was that everything was out of the ordinary. Zira was still cleaning, but her body language betrayed her. Her usually fluid, effortless movements were stiff with restraint. Her forearms, typically so synchronized, hesitated between tasks as if she had to force herself to stay on track. And the scent, it was overwhelming now. Not unpleasant, far from it, but potent in a way that made it impossible to ignore. It clung to the air, a mix of floral and something deeper, something that made his pulse pound a little harder. Ethan had no idea how strong Zalari pheromones were supposed to be. But if he was feeling this affected, then what the hell was Zira going through? He watched as she wiped down the kitchen counters. Her fingers trembled slightly, her breath uneven. She was avoiding looking at him now, as if she knew that one wrong glance could tip the balance of whatever control she had left. Ethan cleared his throat. Zira. She flinched. Just a little. Yes? Her voice was tight. He hesitated, then sighed. Are you sure you want to keep working? You don't have to push yourself. Her hands clenched around the cleaning cloth. I am fine. Liar. Ethan stood up. He wasn't sure why, but sitting still while she was clearly struggling didn't feel right. He took a slow step toward her, testing the waters. "Zyra, look at me." She stiffened. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, reluctantly, she turned her head and met his gaze. Ethan sucked in a breath. Her golden eyes were glowing, not just reflecting the light, actually glowing. The pulsing shimmer in her irises was stronger now, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Her lips were slightly parted, and her chest rose and fell in shallow, quickened breaths. He had never seen her like this. "Ethan," she murmured, and it was the first time she had said his name without his last name attached. It sent a shiver down his spine. Something was happening between them, something electric, undeniable. His brain screamed at him to take a step back, to be the responsible one, to not make this harder for her. But then Zyra did something that shattered all of his resolve. She reached for him. It was subtle at first. One of her lower arms twitched toward him, then stopped as if she caught herself. But then her fingers brushed against the fabric of his sleeve, and a shudder ran through her entire body. A soft, desperate sound escaped her lips. Ethan's stomach flipped. "Zyra." His voice was barely above a whisper. She was trembling now, her 4 hands clenching into fists before releasing, as if she was fighting herself. "I should leave," she whispered, but she didn't move. Ethan swallowed hard. "If you need to go, I understand." Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Zyra exhaled shakily and took a step back, barely, just enough to put distance between them. "I am losing control," she admitted. "This is unprofessional, dangerous even." Ethan's throat was dry. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make this easier for her. But what could he say? She was fighting against her biology, trying to resist something that clearly had a hold on her. Then she looked at him again, really looked at him, and her expression was torn between frustration and something far more vulnerable. "Unless," she murmured. Ethan froze. Zyra's tendrils twitched slightly, her golden eyes searching his face. "Unless you wish to assist me." The room felt too small, too warm. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs. What do you mean by that?" Zyra's fingers curled slightly. "During Varus, Zalari require assistance to stabilize." She paused. "Physical contact helps regulate the intensity." Ethan blinked. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Zyra, are you asking me to?" "I am asking if you wish to help," she interrupted, voice low. Ethan felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with tension, with the scent of her pheromones, with the weight of a decision he wasn't sure he was ready to make. But damn it, he wanted to. And from the way she was looking at him, lips parted, breath uneven, fingers twitching like she was restraining herself, he knew she wanted it too. He took a shaky breath. "I want to help, but only if this is really what you want." Zyra's expression softened just slightly, but there was still hesitation in her eyes. "I do not wish to force this upon you," she said quietly. "You're not," Ethan assured her. "I just don't want you to regret anything." Her gaze locked onto his, and then, slowly, she reached out again. This time she didn't stop. Her fingers brushed against his wrist, light at first, hesitant. Then with a quiet exhale, she pressed her palm flat against his skin. A shiver ran through her entire body. Ethan felt it too. A strange, almost electric sensation crawled up his spine, a warmth spreading through his veins. Zyra let out a breathless sigh. "That already helps." Ethan swallowed. "It does?" She nodded. "Your presence, your touch, it stabilizes the imbalance." The way she said it made his stomach twist in ways he wasn't ready to admit. Another long silence stretched between them. Then Zyra spoke again, so softly he almost didn't hear it, but it is not enough. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He had no idea where this was going. No idea what this would mean for them, for their relationship, if there even was one beyond professional boundaries. But right now, standing here, feeling the way she trembled, just from touching him, there was no way in hell he was sending her away now. And as he let out a slow, steady breath and met her glowing golden eyes, he realized he didn't want to. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. Ethan could feel Zyra's fingers trembling against his wrist, but she didn't pull away. If anything, her grip tightened slightly as if she was testing herself, trying to measure how much control she still had. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He had never seen her like this, so visibly affected, so vulnerable. Zyra had always been the picture of professionalism, of composed efficiency. But now her golden eyes burned with something raw and unrestrained. Ethan swallowed hard. "Are you sure about this?" Zyra exhaled sharply, her tendrils twitching against her shoulders. "I would not have asked if I was unsure." That should have been answer enough, but Ethan hesitated. He wasn't an expert on Solari biology. He didn't know if this was just a biological response for her, or if it was something deeper. But the way she was looking at him, the way her fingers had curled around his wrist like she was starving for touch, it didn't feel like this was just about survival. It felt personal, and that was what tipped him over the edge. Slowly, he turned his hand over, his fingers sliding against hers. Zyra inhaled sharply, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Her body trembled, and her golden eyes flickered with something almost desperate. Ethan took a careful step closer. "Tell me what you need." Zyra's breathing was unsteady. "Prolonged contact helps stabilize my system." She swallowed. "It will ease the intensity of Varys." Ethan nodded. He could do that. It wasn't anything crazy, just helping her. Gently, he reached for her other hand. Zyra shuddered, her entire body reacting as if he had ignited something inside her. Her fingers curled around his, her grip too tight, like she was barely holding herself together. "You do not understand how much this helps," she murmured. Ethan gave her hands a reassuring squeeze. "Then let me help." A quiet, almost relieved sigh slipped past her lips. Then slowly, cautiously, she stepped even closer. Ethan could feel the warmth radiating from her body. The scent of her pheromones wrapped around him, thick and intoxicating, but now that he understood what was happening, he found himself leaning into it instead of pulling away. Zyra hesitated for just a moment before pressing her forehead lightly against his. Shock of warmth spread through Ethan's chest. He wasn't sure if this was a Solari thing, some kind of instinctual action during Varys, but he didn't question it. He just let it happen. Zyra let out a breathless sigh, her tension easing, just slightly. This helps greatly." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, focusing on the feeling of her so close, the quiet hum of her breath against his skin. Good. But as the seconds passed, he noticed something else. Zyra's hands weren't trembling anymore. Her breathing was still uneven, but the sharp desperation in her body language was fading, shifting into something slower, more deliberate. She was still holding on to him, but now, it felt different. Less like she was fighting herself. More like she was leaning into the moment. Her fingers slid up his arms, a slow, almost reverent movement. Ethan sucked in a quiet breath, his skin tingling from the soft brush of her touch. Zyra, her golden eyes met his. "I believe I have underestimated how much I wished for this," she admitted softly. Ethan's breath caught. He wasn't sure if it was the pheromones or something else entirely, but the weight of those words hit him. This wasn't just about her cycle. This wasn't just about her needing relief. This was about them. Zyra had accepted this job despite knowing she was in Varys. She had chosen to be here in his apartment with him because she had wanted this, maybe for a long time. A slow realization unfurled in Ethan's chest, one that made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with biology. He had wanted this too. His hand slid up, carefully resting on her waist. He felt Zyra's breath hitch, her body pressing instinctively closer, like she couldn't help herself. "Is this okay?" he asked. Zyra's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. "Yes," she whispered. "More than okay." A soft, almost relieved chuckle escaped Ethan's lips. "Guess I wasn't imagining things, huh?" Zyra tilted, her head slightly. "Imagining what?" Ethan smiled. "That there was something between us." For a moment, Zyra just stared at him. Then, slowly, finally, she let a small, genuine smile cross her lips. "I suppose we have both been rather oblivious," she murmured. Ethan laughed. "Yeah. Seems like it." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it was different. It wasn't heavy with tension or hesitation. It was comfortable, warm. Zyra exhaled, resting her forehead against his again. "The intensity is fading," she murmured. "Your presence has stabilized me." Ethan smirked. "Glad I could help." Zyra's lips twitched. "I believe I owe you a great debt." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and how do Zalari repay debts?" Zyra's golden eyes glowed just slightly, her fingers tracing slow patterns against his arms. "We shall have to explore that in time," she murmured. Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. Yeah, this was far from over, and he wouldn't have it any other way.